God, most gracious, most merciful. This is an oral history interview with Brother Jamal Craft. The interview is being conducted on Saturday, April 19, 2014 at Medina Institute Masjid in Duluth, Georgia. The interviewers are Zainab Ansari and Abbas Barzagar, and the interview is for the purpose of creating an oral historical record with Brother Jamal Craft. Thank you, Brother Jamal. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing?
Okay. So, Brother Jamal, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your own personal family background, where you were born, where you were raised, and sort of just walk us through some of your basic personal biographical history.
Sure. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, September 1952. I am the third son of John and LaRuth Craft. I have two older brothers who are older than I am, John and Lionel Craft. I was born as Lyric Craft. And my parents originally were from Atlanta, Georgia, and they moved to Chicago, Illinois in the 1940s, early 1940s, at a time when many African Americans were leaving the South because of racial oppression and also the lack of job opportunities. So my father moved to Chicago, and he did very well. Within 10 years, he bought 3 homes, rented them out, so that provided family income for our family as well as other family members too, because some of them did not have a place to stay. So my father was like, he was like considered a big father figure to many other family members. They looked up to him, because of his charity that he did for helping family members. All my educational background was also in Chicago, from kindergarten through college. I attended Malcolm X College for 2 years, and then from there I went to Chicago Technical College. And I majored in engineering, architecture, and drafting and design. If you ever go to Chicago, you will see there's a city of magnificent architecture, and I've always been impressed with the architecture of buildings, the churches, the schools, the downtown structure. So wherever I went in the city, I said, wow, this is so beautiful. I would like to participate in this and maybe one day do something on architectural scale. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but who knows? It could maybe happen one day. I don't know. But anyhow, I graduated from Austin Senior High School. I went to Malcolm X for 2.5 years, and then I went to Chicago Technical College where I did 1 year. Then I dropped out of school and I went to get a job because by this time I'm 21 years old and my father is ill. He's in bad health. And so I'm the only family member that's working in the household. And my father passed in early 1974. So at that time when he passed, one of my brothers had already married. My mother had to quit her job. My father had to quit his job, of course. And so that left me working. And I had one brother, he had plans of relocating to Atlanta, Georgia at that time. So after that, I worked for a company called Montgomery Ward's for like 3 years, 3 to 4 years.
That was a department store, wasn't it?
Yes, department store. I worked.
So we're probably talking early 60s right now?
We're talking about the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah, after school, because I graduated. Yeah. So we're talking about 1974.
Okay.
74 to 76. I started working at Montgomery Ward's in November 1973. I dropped out of college in May of 1973. And I pursued because I had to have money, provide for myself. I'm 21 years old now, in early 73, 74. And so anyhow, I worked there. And then I went back to Allied Institute of Technology, where I did graduate in 1979 under automotive technology. And I pursued that career for a little while. And I moved to Atlanta, Georgia in 1984. So
So you came here in 1984?
Actually a little early in 83, I'm sorry, 1983.
Were there any obstacles obstacles to your pursuing automotive engineering or technology as an African American man in the 1970s
No.
or
No.
80s, 19?
No,
Okay,
no,
all right.
no whatsoever, no. Because it's something I wanted to do. Unfortunately, I didn't carry it all the way through, but at that time, I was pursuing that. And I've always been good in art, and so I just kind of got involved in other different things as to why I didn't pursue it. And sometimes once you get out of school, it's not always easy to get back in. You know, once you get a job and you're working and you get sort of like derailed into other different things of life, marriage, family, it's not always easy.
Absolutely. So at the time that you're coming up in the 60s and the early 70s, well, this is a pretty volatile time of American history, and Chicago is obviously a place where a lot of
Yes.
activism is taking place, a lot of issues around racial justice, civil rights, and things like this. Could you tell us just a little bit about what it was like growing up at that time with these issues? I mean, how did you encounter them? Where did you see them? What was the feel on the street like? You know?
My beginning of, I would say, awareness or consciousness began when I was 5 years old. My parents used to always, because in the late 1950s, I was born in 1952. By 1957, that was the Little Rock issue at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I can recall my mother saying, hey, come, watch the news. You know, and at 5 years old, my parents used to demand and command, watch the news. That way, when you get older, you will have a knowledge of all these different events while you were young, see. So I grew up with that, and then my parents were activists too. My mother, she was active with the NAACP in Chicago. She was one of the leaders of the National NAACP Women's Auxiliary Branch in Chicago. And so was my father too, but my father was more a businessman. And he had a number of business, service station in Chicago. He also owned a grocery store up in Covert, Michigan. But my mother, she was the one that was mostly into the NAACP, and we were youth members of the NAACP. You know, just card carrying, nothing really going out to protest or nothing like that. Not at that age. But anyhow, going into the 1960s, I recall that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was coming to Chicago in July 1964. By that time, I'm 12 years old. And he also came in July 1966. It was called the Chicago Freedom Rally. And I went to that. It was about 100,000 people there. That may have actually been the largest rally that Martin Luther King spoke at, other than the March in Washington. It was 101 degrees, and I'm like, oh my God, that Soldier Field in Chicago, the big football stadium. And, you know, it was like just unbearable heat at the time, right off the coast of Lake Michigan, you know. But anyhow, Dr. King spoke, and he was speaking about the freedom movement, African Americans suffering, and he wanted to bring the freedom movement to the North as well, because racial injustices was beyond just the South, but Chicago was a hotbed of racial activity as well as other different cities and states. So anyhow, moving on forward, 1966, that's when Chicago exploded during a riot in July 1966. It was an area called the Village. And what happened, the temperature was about 100 degrees again, and some youth had went out and opened the water hydrants, and the police came by to shut it down, and the people reacted, and so it was about like a 2 or 3 day riot. Then moving on into 1968, after Dr. Martin Luther King was killed, I was a junior. I was entering my junior year in high school. I went to a Catholic high school as well for about 3 years. I forgot to tell you that part. It was called St. Philip's Basilica High School. I wasn't Catholic, but my family wanted me to go to a Catholic school because they had provided better education than the public school system. And the public schools in Chicago at that time was going through a lot of gang violence. And so to keep me out of that environment, they decided to sent me to this Catholic school. But anyhow, as I was going to school one day, this was April 5th, the very day after Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. They let all the students out early. School got out, normally we would get out about 2:30, 3 o'clock, but we got out like around that day about 12 o'clock noon, because the school was about 55% Caucasian, and they feared that many of the white students could be attacked, so they just let everybody out at one time. And on my way home is when I seen people in the streets taking bricks, knocking out store windows, and I was in a state of shock. I said, how could this be? This looked like Vietnam. The pictures there are showing of Saigon at that time, 1968, the Tet offenses I've seen in Chicago. And the thing about it was in my neighborhood. This was the first time in my life that I had seen what appeared to be war stories from overseas now in America, right in my environment. But my parents did not play that. They said, no, you're not going to go out there and participate in that. This is just blind, emotional reaction. People were ready to rebel because of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, and this was the perception that they felt that they could do as a way of getting back at the administration, especially the Chicago administration and the federal government. I think Johnson was the president at that time. Yeah, this is 1968. So that was part of my consciousness, because being in Chicago and seeing Dr. Martin Luther King rally and march in 1968, 67, 66, I lived through that experience.
Tell me the neighborhood. What neighborhood in Chicago did you grow up in?
I grew up on Chicago's west side.
The west side?
Most African Americans in Chicago live on the south side, but the perception is that all blacks in Chicago live on the south side. But the west side was probably about 70% African American, and there are also blacks that live on the north side, especially in the area once known as Cabrini Green.
Cabrini Green?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a big housing project.
And tell us about your encounters with Islam then. Out of all those different groups that were active around then, you had the NAACP, you say you had Martin Luther King. A lot of people say that with the death of Martin Luther King, this did something for them. What was sort of your encounter with Islam or Islamic images, anything like that?
Well, with Islam, that came much later. There was still some activism that came from the 60s going into the 70s. In 1970, I graduated from high school and I entered Malcolm X College. So you can imagine just the name Malcolm X College. You're not going to go to Malcolm X College and be an idiot and not know anything about African American struggle, and especially with the struggle of the Vietnam era, the anti-war movement was going on. There was different movements that was merging together at that time. So I entered Malcolm X College in the fall of 1970, and one of my instructors sent me on a project. And the project was to research African American music and art, which I did. I went to the, I think it's called the Southside Community Art Center in Chicago. It's now called DuSable Museum of African American History. And I did a research paper there on African American art, which was related to my art class at that time. So while there, the curator of the museum was Dr. Boros. She's very well known. She's a scholar in African American history, and she gave me an exam to take. And it was a 100-question exam about African American history. And when I took that exam, she said, you had the highest grade of everyone that have taken it. I mean, everybody at least missed some questions, but you got everything correct, And I have to give tribute to my parents, because my parents, not only were they involved in the NAACP, but my father, he admired the Marcus Garvey and Elijah Muhammad and Abdel Nasser of Egypt. My father was really for liberation all around the world. So in 1964, I'm regressing a little bit. In 1964, my father brought home a book called The 100 Greatest African Americans. I think at that time it was called The 100 Greatest Negroes in American History. And I still have that book. And I used to read that book religiously. And so by 1969, I'm having all this consciousness about African Americans' achievement throughout American history. But I know that the history goes beyond America, because African Americans or black people are all over the world. But this was just focused on America. So anyhow, going forward, once I got into college, there were all type of different groups and social activism going on. This group, Socialist Workers Party, Progressive Labor Party, SNCC, Black Panther Party, Islam, and various different groups. But I began to look at the movement, the youth movement, and I was inspired by, more or less at that time, listening to Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, Huey Newton. So I began to kind of follow what they were talking about. I mean, this was another option. This was never to reject what Martin Luther King was talking about. But as Malcolm X said, that in one of his speeches, he said that if the people who are oppressing the people, if they don't listen to what Martin Luther King is talking about, then there's going to be another opposition. There's going to be another way. And so, there was two ways. And not saying that violence was another way, but there was another consciousness. And I would just say that I went with the other consciousness.
Tell me, you're growing up in Chicago, and this story about your father's link to Marcus Garvey with the book in your home, I could just picture it sort of sitting around and a child growing up in that sort of environment. Tell me more about your father's, admiration of these figures that you mentioned. How else would that have come out?
Well, now, my father, he wasn't part of Marcus Garvey, but he was just aware. Well, it extends back even beyond my father. My grandparents, they were conscious people too, And I've been blessed with all my uncles and aunts. As far back as I can remember, they were all people of consciousness, and they instilled that in all the children and grandchildren coming up. So, my father was just, he wanted to see the best of African Americans, and he was very vocal about, speaking up and speaking on behalf of black people, that we should be achieving higher goals in life. My mother did too. My mother was also a school community representative. And so she worked with the Board of Education in Chicago, and she wanted to see us also achieve academically, you see. So, and then they would go out and then also, try to teach the people in the community as well, My father, he was a member of the West Side Business Owners Association in Chicago, Illinois. And I think he was the president of that for a while, but that's probably before I was born. And my father also had a number of businesses. He had a service station in Chicago. He had a shoe shine shop in Chicago, a cleaners in Chicago. He also had a cleaners in Atlanta before he moved to Chicago. And he also opened up a grocery store, a full-time supermarket in Covert, Michigan. And also he owned a shoe store as well in Covert, Michigan. So he would interact with people. And then my parents always shared the knowledge they had with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a natural decision as part of the whole family for you to go to Malcolm X College then?
That was my choice.
It was your choice?
To go to Malcolm X College. It was close. It was in my neighborhood.
It was in your neighborhood. How
Yes.
did they feel about that? They were supportive of you going there?
Oh, they were supportive. Very supportive. Yeah, no problem.
And what drew you to that college?
What drew me to the college? Activism.
Okay.
Yeah, activism. And plus, it's in the neighborhood. It was easy for me to get to. It was only like 7 minutes away from my house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
As opposed to spending money to get on the city buses or take a cab and drive 10, 20 miles away, going to Northwestern University or DePaul University. And it was easy for me to get accepted in Malcolm X College. But anyhow, once I got to Malcolm X College, there was a group called the Afro-Asian Latin Student Alliance.
Afro-Asian Latin students?
Yes, and what they wanted to do is bring Latin, African Americans, and Asians, Latinos together to work in the cause of student rights. And I found out that the Afro-Asian Latin Student Alliance was a student organization of the local Black Panther Party. So to join the Afro-Asian Latin Student Alliance actually connected you with the Black Panther Party.
I see. And the Black Panther Party didn't accept non-blacks in their formal membership, correct?
That's correct.
So this was a way for them to sort of have a broader coalition.
Yes. you've heard of the Rainbow Coalition? Yes. That was actually started by the Black Panther Party in Chicago by Fred Hampton, who was assassinated in December 4th, 1969. And a lot of people don't know that. Jesse Jackson took it and ran with the image of starting the Rainbow Coalition. But the Black Panther Party was never anti-white. There was a lot of white people that did work with the Black Panther Party. They gave aid. There was a People's Health Center. There was nurses there who were Caucasian. There were people who were donors to help support different projects and programs of the party. So it was never, this was something that the media created to create that friction to keep people from supporting the party.
Were you ever formally a part of the Black Panthers?
When I joined the Afro-Asian Latin Student Alliance, well, we had our branch meetings at Malcolm X College, but when they wasn't at the college, they were at the Black Panther Party office. At that time, it was 2350 West Madison in Chicago. So I went to the office, and we would have our meetings there. And the student meetings were basically the same program as the party.
Very community-based work.
Yes.
So the organization was really concerned with a kind of social platform. You had mentioned student rights. I'm just wondering, what were folks talking about that day? What were the major concerns, priorities?
Yeah, well, the student organization was to adhere to party policy, but on a student level, the party of reaching out to students to educate them of the political issues that was going on at that time, the war issues that was going on at that time, the need to free inmates in the jail, students who had been framed for various different charges and stuff. You had Kent State, you had Jackson State issues that was going on at that time. So the party just wanted to make sure that those students had their rights, But what happened is that I became active with the party as a community worker, not a party member, but as a community worker. The community worker would basically do volunteer time. And I liked it like that because I didn't have to give all my time to doing party work and stuff like that. And it was also in my neighborhood. So I became involved with it through being a community worker. However, by doing the community work, after about a year, they told me, you have been drafted as a cadre member. A cadre member is that if the leadership for some reason get locked up in jail, then that would be another group that replaced the people that was locked up. And that's where your role come in. So I said, I didn't know that. They said, yes. But you continue to do what you were doing. I was still a student at that time. And then I went to work, and I liked it like that. But I still did party work, selling newspapers, working in the Breakfast for Children program, the people's free health clinics, and I worked in food drives. We bagged and gave away 5,000 bags of groceries, 10,000 bags of groceries on a couple occasions in Chicago. And we had very good support in doing that.
I have a question about your religious background. Were your parents active with any particular church?
My parents were active in the Baptist church. I came up in the Baptist church, but my parents were not extremists when it comes to Christian religion. As a matter of fact, my father was very critical of the church. And his father was a minister. My grandfather was a minister. And ministry runs in my family. There are many people in my family who come from various different branches of Christianity, mostly the Baptist church, though. We do have a few people who are Jehovah's Witnesses and other different branches of Christianity. But what happened is my interest with Islam, being in Chicago, in 1972, I recall downtown Chicago, I was selling Black Panther Party newspaper. And this guy came up to me and he said, I'll trade you a newspaper. I said, okay. And he traded me a newspaper called Al Islam. And he was a member of the Dar Islam, the Islamic Party of North America. And he gave me a newspaper, and I gave him a Black Panther Party newspaper. And then he went on and told me, he said, well, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. And he said, let me tell you what just happened. He said, in Nashville, the whole Black Panther Party branch converted to Islam. I said, wow. So he invited me to come to, this was in Ramadan, 1972. He invited me to come to, I think it was an iftar at that time, at their local mosque. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it, and I continued to more or less like be involved in doing Black Panther Party work, as well as being a student, and then also going to work thereafter. And then around late 1974, 75, being in Chicago, which was the headquarters of the Nation of Islam, you could not help but running into Nation of Islam people in the streets of Chicago. And of course, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was also there too. And then in 1975, early 1975 in February, he passed, and his son Warifdeen Muhammad, Imam Warifdeen Muhammad, took his place, and he was selected and chosen to lead the Nation of Islam forward. So when I went to work thereafter, that was the talk at work. Hey man, you know, the Muslims are changing. It really wasn't the Muslims changing, but the Nation of Islam was changing. So that got my interest in listening to what the Nation of Islam was talking about. And they were saying that, well, you know, they're talking about accepting Orthodox Islam now. They're talking about, you know, no more being a sectarian group, which excludes everybody. That if you're Caucasian, you're Arab, Pakistani, you're welcome to come to the mosque. And then they established Jummah prayer. They established the Eid Day celebrations, and also going to Hajj. But by that time, I still had not accepted Islam at that time officially, but I was beginning to just, you know, it was a little buzz of listening to what the Muslims were saying. And because I had stopped going to church many years before that, because there was it's just the opposition of the church opposed to people that was involved in a struggle to overcast, or I wouldn't say overcast, but I don't even want to use the word overthrow, but to overcome the system of racism and oppression and capitalism in this country that was going on at that time. So I moved on. My family, we also have a home in Michigan. We have a little small summer home, or you could say a little farm up in Covert, South Haven, Michigan. I moved there, and it was there in 1977, I had got the Holy Quran, and I recall putting the Quran and the Bible next to each other, and I just said, oh God, lead me to the religion that you feel is best for me, for what I can do and how it will impact my life. Because I just wasn't down with the church thing. It just wasn't in my heart to live the Christianity, because I seen a lot of hypocrisy in it. And I'm not knocking Christians or nothing like that, but I'm just saying that I didn't see the sincerity as I seen in Muslims. Most of the Muslims I ran into at that time, they were educated, they were able to express their religion. And the same questions I could ask Muslims when I would ask Christians, the Christians could not even give an answer. Well, come see my pastor. Well, why have to see a pastor? Let me ask you. And even the pastor didn't even know. So I say, well, maybe this is logical, I become Muslim. So living in Michigan at the time, the first mosque I went to was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And when I went to the Grand Rapids Masjid, the people embraced me like I had been Muslim all my life. And that was such a warm brotherhood, and I never will forget that. So at that point, I started studying Islam.
Well, where did you get that Quran?
I got it in Chicago. I had got it earlier in 1976 in Chicago.
Okay.
But I never did read it.
Was it at a bookstore?
It was at a bookstore. It was called the National House, the Nation of Islam. They had their own bookstore.
Okay.
Unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but what happened is there's Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, which has the biggest Bible bookstore in the world, at least back then. It may still be now. And I went to Moody Bible Institute asking for the Quran. And they're like, I'm sorry, we don't have it here. You need to go to a Muslim bookstore. I said, well, I know it's a religious book. I thought that you would carry it here. And they said, no, you need to go to maybe a Muslim bookstore. So I looked, okay.
No, go ahead.
So I looked up the Muslim bookstores in the Chicago area, and there was one on the south side, and I went there and I got the Quran. But I didn't know Arabic, and I would just look at the English. But even looking at the English, when I opened it up, I said, wow, this is heavy, very heavy. And this is stuff that these people don't even know. But again, by not having no one to teach me and instruct me and to learn this a lot, I was still at a loss, and I was still doing what I basically had been doing all along, just working and what have you. But once I moved to Michigan, I went to the Grand Rapids Mosque. They invited me to come back, come to Juma, and it was 60 miles away from where I lived at, so that was a little conflict with that because I still had to work when I was in Michigan. Eventually, I went back to Chicago, and when I went back to Chicago, I started going to the masjid full time. And I was part of the Imam program in 1978. I studied with the Imam in Chicago. And then I went back to Michigan, and there was some little conflict going on at a local masjid. So they asked me if I could start leading the prayers there, which I did. And I did that up until 1982.
Also, right away, you were put in a position of leadership, huh? Just a couple of
Probably within a year.
Oh, mashallah.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I converted to Islam, I never will forget, when I converted to Islam, the brother was speaking Arabic. I said, man, I want to speak like that one day. And he was African American, and he was speaking to Arabic just like I'm conversating with you now in English.
Is that right?
Yes. So I got a CD, well, not CD, I got a tape cassette, and I started listening to that cassette religiously. And within like about an hour, I learned Al-Fatiha. So after listening to the tapes just on and on and on, the next week I went to the mosque. They asked me to lead the prayer, and I led it without making no noticeable mistakes. And I'm sure I would have been corrected if I did, so no one corrected me. So.
The Grand Rapids Mosque, was it a predominantly African-American mosque? Or was
Yeah, it really wasn't a mosque. You could say it was a Jamia Islamic center for local people that live in the area. That was about maybe 10 Muslim families, because this is in a rural area in Michigan. It's not nowhere near Detroit or Flint or Grand Rapids. The closest big urban area is Grand Rapids and Kalamazoo, but this was basically a rural farming area.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So after Grand Rapids, you went back to Chicago and became imam of the masjid in Chicago, right?
No.
Or was this in Michigan where you were the imam?
I don't even want to say I was imam. I would just say I was a director of a Jami, Jamaat there in Covert, Michigan.
Okay, so this is in Michigan. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Mm-hmm. And your family, how did they receive news of your becoming Muslim? Did you tell
No
them
problem.
right away, or?
Really?
No problem. Because my family is open-minded. My father, I found out years later after I converted to Islam, my mother said, well, your father was a Mason. And, we have the Holy Quran. And she had told me to clean up the living room one day, not the living room, but the closet in the living room. And we had a lot of books stored up from even before I was born. And so my mother told me, she said, well, just go and clean up this closet with all these old books. And so I took all these books off the shelf and just threw them away. And then days later, my mother, she said, did you throw away the Quran? I said, what? It was in there? She said, yes. And I didn't know it. And my mother said, we had the Quran even before you were born.
How does that make you feel? What do you think about that? You think that's...
Well, it made me feel good. And like I said, my parents were conscious parents. I didn't grow up in this household of, we are gung-ho Christians and Jesus is the only way. And my parents were like, no. We have to, because actually that's promoting racism in itself. It's promoting, because the thing is that you're sectarian and you're dividing people up to the point where you cannot accept humanity. The fact is that Islam and Christianity embrace all human beings. And my parents wasn't like that. Well, you just got to accept this religion. So I didn't have no problem. As a matter of fact, after I became Muslim, I got the Quran and started sharing it with all my cousins in Chicago. So many of my relatives in Chicago have the Quran.
And what year again did you become Muslim?
1977.
1977.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really interesting time, to have become Muslim. Were you kind of like watching the political situation at all? Because I know my parents were really kind of looking at Iran really closely during that time and just kind of really interested in what was going on. Did you have any of that on your radar?
Yes, that was, the Shah of Iran situation broke out in 1978 at that time. But really, the political situation had little bearing on me. I'll tell you now, the biggest impact of me being Muslim, when I lived in Michigan, there was a town called Benton Harbor, Michigan. I used to go to their library, and they had books called Encyclopedia Britannica, the In-Depth Knowledge series. And just to read on Islam, there's like hundreds of pages, and I studied that book religiously. So when I did come into the presence of Muslims, they said, oh, you're like, your knowledge of Islam is if you have been Muslim for all your life. And I had just only been Muslim maybe only months or years. And he said that was good. He said, because you're seeking knowledge. And this is one of the commandments in our religion that the Prophet Muhammad gave to the people. You know, even if you have to go as far away as China to attain knowledge, then do so. The first commandment that God gave to the Prophet was Iqra, Bismi Rabbika Ladhi Khalaq. Read in the name of thy Lord. So he said that you're following, this is a precept in Islam, that all Muslims should seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave.
I've got to ask one question about your time in Chicago growing up. You said that you went to Malcolm X College. What was your exposure to the Nation of Islam prior to Malcolm X College or to kind of your college years? You know, I haven't heard you say anything about that. Were they not active on the West Side? Was that not visible, or was it just too normal?
The Nation of Islam was not very active on the West Side of Chicago. And I'm going to tell you, when I went to Malcolm X College, the Nation of Islam was not viewed in a very positive light because the city of Chicago had built a new campus called the Malcolm X campus. And many officials of the Nation of Islam did not like the name. They wanted to name it Malcolm Little College. And, for various reasons that a lot of people at that time had some issues with Malcolm X. But anyhow, the people, the students in the neighborhood and the community said that no, the wide consensus of the people was to name it Malcolm X College. So they didn't have much of an impact on the West Side. As far as me personally, the Nation of Islam did not have that much of an impact with me personally because, again, I was more or less active with the more or less political movement, the Black Panther Party, Socialist Party, the anti-war movement that was going on. That kept me more focused on that. And then personally, I didn't follow all the doctrines and believe in the doctrines of the Nation of Islam, Yaqub theory, and black man being God. I said, no, how the black man going to be God? He's got to go ask a white man for a piece of bread. You know, that doesn't make sense. You know.
I had a question for you. If this is and just kind of check on time here. It's 3:38, so
Keep it rolling.
inshallah, so we're gonna try to keep it rolling, inshallah. I hope for about another 15 minutes because there are a couple things I want to get to, Brother Jamal. And one of the questions is, a lot of the brothers and sisters we sit down with have become Muslim essentially through the Nation of Islam. Then they kind of went through the transition in 1975.
Yes.
Imam W.D. Muhammad. So, do you deal with a lot of assumptions from people that you must have become Muslim through the nation? I mean, do you get that? Because a lot of people say there's this assumption that African Americans that was their journey to Islam. It was through the Nation of Islam. So, do you ever find yourself challenging that assumption?
No, I want to challenge that assumption. I think a vast majority of African Americans back in the 1960s and 70s embraced Islam through the Nation of Islam. And I think that was good because it did give them a consciousness that they didn't get anywhere else. But beginning in the 1970s, around 1975, when Imam Wafdi Muhammad was the leader of the Nation of Islam, and he changed the name to World Community Al-Islam in the West. And then the Sunnah became more or less the predominant theology of the Muslim community. But also, there were many different activist Muslim groups that was going on. You also had the Dar Islam movement. You had the Islamic Party on the East Coast. You had Muslims who were of the Hanafi orientation. You had a few who were even Shiite, You had many that were Sufi. I recall in 1979, perhaps, 1980, Imam Wafdi Muhammad said that if you're not satisfied with the teachings that we're teaching here, you're free. You're still Muslim. So I took that to venture out, to learn. And Chicago was a center of many masajid. there are many Islamic institutions in the greater Chicago area, and one of them was Muslim Community Center. So I started becoming active and going to Muslim Community Center because the programs there was much more involved, teaching Arabic studies, and many African Americans left. Well, they didn't leave, I would say, the Nation of Islam, but they started going to the Muslim Community Center because they had scholars there who could teach Arabic, who had excellent Quran programs and Sirah programs, and they had excellent programs also for the women. As a matter of fact, there were more African American women there than there were men. And the Imam there and the Hafiz there, his name was Irfan Khan, who has a long history of reaching out to all Muslims across the United States, but especially in the Chicagoland area. So I became more or less involved in going to that masjid by the early 1980s. And then I started traveling in Jamaat, Tablighi Jamaat. And when I started traveling in Tablighi Jamaat, I traveled all across the country. I went from Chicago to Colorado, Iowa, from Colorado to Arizona, Arizona to California, and I'm meeting Muslims like I never met before. I stayed with an all Caucasian white Muslim family in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they embraced me more in a way that I've never been embraced in my life. And so this was the full gamut of Islam. You know, I was meeting people from all over. And the interesting thing about it is that when I became Muslim, I would meet people from all different racial backgrounds, and they accepted me as a brother. And I'm like, if I had remained a Christian, would I have received this type of brotherhood? I doubt it. I seriously doubt it, because they don't even have this type of brotherhood in America. I mean, the proof of this, go to some little rural town in Georgia or Alabama, some town with 8,000 people, and you go to an all-white church and see if they will accept you as a brother. Or let the whites go into an all-black church and see if the people will accept each other as a brother. But when you have people from various different racial backgrounds and they don't use the race, not to say that people are not racially conscious in Islam, you do have that degree too. We can't sweep it on the floor. But if we focus our energy and our delil on what the Prophet of Islam said and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran to follow, then we'll be okay in terms of, you know, Allah tells us in the Quran not to despise one another, but to embrace each other. The best of you is the one who is most righteous, not the one who say, I'm black, I'm white. You know, that doesn't matter in Islam.
So the Muslim Community Center in Chicago that you mentioned, mostly Pakistani mosque?
The leadership was Pakistani, but it was full gamut of, it was a people's mosque. Let's put it that way, the people's mosque. There was probably about 40 different nations of people going there.
How long did you spend at the Tablighi Jamaat doing the travels?
Off and on, over the course of about 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
Now, this wasn't consistent, but it's just that when I have some time, I would go out. Like if I had to go out maybe 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah, I was born in Taos, New Mexico. So when you said New Mexico, I said, subhanAllah, you know, that you're out there in the middle of New Mexico.
Yeah, we went to the masjid, and there was a masjid in Santa Fe, also Albuquerque. I think it's called Dar Islam. Yeah, I was there when it first opened up.
I was born right across the way. That's where my mother's village is from.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff. And so so now that's right around the time that you moved to Atlanta?
I moved to Atlanta in 1984. 1983. I was in Colorado. I really liked Colorado. I stayed with some Muslims in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is about 60 miles north of Denver. And I liked the atmosphere of Denver and the West. I just like the culture of the West, the open land, the cowboys.
That's where I'm actually from, is Denver.
Oh, good.
In Boulder, Colorado. Did you spend any time in Boulder, Colorado?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there was a sheikh in Boulder. He was from Comoros Island, off the east coast of Africa, and I met him in, I think it's a little town right outside of Boulder, Louisville, Colorado. He was staying there for a minute.
Really?
Yeah.
Comoros sheikh in Colorado.
Yes, that was in 1982.
Did you have a family by that time?
No, I was a single man at the time, so I could afford to travel. I did get married in 1984. I'm sorry I have to regress again because there's so many different. But I am a father of 3 daughters. My oldest daughter is named Sakina. Then I have another daughter, Aisha, and my baby daughter is Miriam. My daughter, Aisha, she's a proud parent of 2 children. They live also in the Snellville area. I have one daughter, she's a student at Tennessee State University in Nashville. And she's a junior now in college. She's majoring in business, administration, art and design.
And I know you captured some memories for your family in that scrapbook. Could we talk about your scrapbook a little bit? Would that be? I think this is a good way to kind of.
Sure.
Yeah, a good way to kind of segue into the end of our interview.
Okay.
We'd love to talk to you longer, but I know that the time is ticking away.
Okay.
Could you hold that up a little bit?
Sure.
Perfect. So Islam in America. Can you give us the background, why you decided, when you started putting that together and why, and maybe show us a little bit?
Okay. Yes, this is one of my scrapbooks, one of about 15 I've put together. I started working on this back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It's just a compilation of different events concerning Muslims in this country, and going back to as far as like the 1930s. This is a description of Allah as the creator, and hadiths. Hadiths are the sayings and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, alayhi salam. I put it together and I started working on this because oftentimes, coming from a Christian background, Christian family, a lot of people had questions regarding Islam. So rather than to express and give them a whole booklet of words coming from me, I said, well, maybe it would be better if I could put together a book or a scrapbook and just give it to them and let them read it and share it with them, because it also has many pictures in here as well. And this is, I don't know if the camera can catch this or not. This is pictures of this is the picture of it's called the Mother Mosque. This is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Here, I got a chance to stay there for 3 days back in 1983. And it's one of the oldest mosques in America. It still exists today. It's called Islam in Iowa. And no one even would perceive that Islam would be such big in such a little small town in Iowa. But there were a lot of Bosnians and people from Russia and Lebanon that moved to Iowa. This is another thing about Islam in this country. A lot of people perceive that the majority of people in this country are African Americans. Well, at one time that was true, because many African Americans came to this country as slaves. They were captured and forced into Christianity. But originally, many African Americans were Muslims in America and in Africa, of course. And then after so long, they were Christianized into Christianity. But America also received many immigrants coming from all over the world, starting like in the 1700s, 1800s, and many of them came from Muslim countries. There are even Muslim cemeteries. There's a cemetery, I forgot, I think it's in Arizona, and they have an Arabic script pointing with one finger pointing at one God. And this cemetery has been there for many years.
So tell us, what did you find in Atlanta when you got here in 1983?
Well, originally, again, my parents is from Atlanta, so I have many relatives here.
You come and visited the city.
Yeah, I came to here because I had a job offer.
Okay.
And I had a choice of either going out to Denver or staying here. And I said, well, since I have greater family ties in Atlanta, I'll just come here. Atlanta's a little bit closer to Chicago, about 300 miles closer. And so, I mean, I liked Atlanta pretty well, so it was no big deal about coming, and I've been here since then. But my home is still Chicago, though. That's always, home is,
Did you have Muslim connections when you came down here, or prior to coming down here?
When I first came to Atlanta, no, I didn't have Muslim connections, but I was aware because I came to a Jamaat that was at Spelman College in 1980. And the first masjid I went to, that was a masjid that used to be on Simpson Road at that time. I made Jummah prayer. I don't know the name of it, but I went there. And then I came back in 1982 to visit again, and that's when I met Imam Jamil Al-Amin, and I started going to the West End Muslim Community Masjid whenever I would visit Atlanta, because again, I come kind of from that type of background. Some people used to say, oh, that's the Black Panther Mosque, you know, because of Imam Jamil. But when I went there, you know, I was embraced like, no problem. That type of mentality didn't faze me at all. And then I would also go to Atlanta Masjid. I would also visit Masjid Al Farouk, because back in 1983 and 84, there was only like about 4 mosques in Atlanta. So those were the only places you could go to. Now I think it's over 50 or 60.
And Masjid on Simpson Road. My dad remembers a masjid on Simpson Road. I don't think he remembers the name though. Do you remember the imam? The imam who was there?
I don't know. I don't recall his name.
He talked about someone named Ben Banu, but I'm not sure if he was at Simpson or another location.
It was right on the corner of Simpson and Sunset. Yeah.
So, what was your sense of how the communities got along when you were here, you know, when you first came here in the early 80s? Because you said there's just a handful of masajid, and so were people visiting other masajid? Were they doing Eid together? What was the community sort of spirit like?
Well, thereafter, after I moved here in 1983, the Islamic community began to have joint Eids together during Ramadan. And after Ramadan, they had joint Eids in the parks. The Muslim community here in Atlanta, for me personally, coming from Chicago, well, I mean, it wasn't at the sense of the same exposure of community as we had in Chicago at that time. There was more sectarianism in Atlanta at that time because, again, Atlanta was a much smaller metropolis than Chicago, and people didn't have the fear of merging with one another in Chicago as they did here, whereas African Americans here were like, who are these foreigners here? You know, who are these, these Pakistanis coming here, these Arabs coming here, you know, we don't, you know, so you didn't have that type of bonding of brotherhood here as you did in Chicago. Not saying that it was perfectly well there as well, but that was the reality here. So when I came here, I never had no problem with dealing with people in terms of like ethnicity and what have you. So I like the multiculturalism because to me personally, you can learn more. So I started going more to 14th Street, which is called Masjid Al Farouk.
So you ended up landing there because of the cosmopolitan kind of...
Yeah, and I met more friends there right away.
Oh, I see.
And they had Islamic programs that they were teaching there. The youth, they had all type of programs there.
Would you say that resembled the Muslim community masjid?
Pretty much so, yeah. It was almost the same.
You kind of felt the same way over there?
Yes.
Tell me, at that time, 1977, this time that you're coming into Islam, you're starting to take these Jamaat tours and whatnot around the country. That was a pretty rough time with Warthi Muhammad, Louis Farrakhan, old members of the Nation of Islam. You know, that was kind of a rough time. How did you navigate being sort of new, you know, to the deen, and there's a lot of infighting going on between these different groups?
Personally, I didn't have no problem with it. Personally, it didn't bother me, and I didn't see it. Because once I started learning Islam, and I started learning the sciences of Islam, and I started doing the research of Islam, I knew what was the truth, and I stood with that. So if I ran to anybody with that, I just given them the dalil on what the Quran and the Prophet said, and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. So if there's any debate against Allah and His Messenger, you use the Quran as a dialogue. So I never did have that. It never did confront me.
Because you know, for some folks, this defined their experience, but seems like you're able to just stay very far away from it.
Yeah, I was able to far away with that. I was able to not be part of that because I know it was part of the Nation of Islam. So if I had came up in the Nation of Islam and Farrakhan was part of the Nation of Islam and Warthi Muhammad also came out of the Nation of Islam, that could have been some type of a crash. But so, you know, I embrace Orthodox Islam, or what we call the Sunnah of Islam, you know. So I never did have this severe type of conflict going on in my life with the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan, and that type of issue, you know.
Okay, so how do you think Atlanta fits into the larger landscape? Sounds like you traveled quite a lot around the country, seeing Muslims in different parts of the country. What do you think Atlanta's Muslim story is?
And we're going to conclude on that question because it's almost 4.
Okay. The Atlanta has become a melting pot of Muslims across the South and across the world, but that's happening everywhere. I was in Nashville, and it's pretty much happening there too. I mean, there are immigrants moving all over the United States, and I think that what you find in Atlanta and any other metropolitan area in the United States is just a foregarment of what's happening in this country, that Islam is the fastest growing religion. And it's not just the fastest growing religion with African Americans in this country now. There are more than 3 million, there are about 3 to 4 million African Americans. Matter of fact, I was even reading that they estimate that the third largest faith group among African Americans now is Islam. That the Baptist Church and I think the Methodist Church is number 1 and 2, and then Islam number 3. There are more Muslims in this country now than there are black Catholics or black Jehovah's Witnesses and all the other different branches of Christianity. And Islam is continuing to grow. And I think that in Atlanta, you will see that very much so in the next coming years and decades as we move forward, inshallah.
Inshallah. Do you think anything about Atlanta being sort of the black Mecca and sort of being the home of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement? Do you think that's done anything with, for the vibrancy of the black Muslim community here? Has it helped it? Has it hurt it?
I think it has helped it very much so. But Atlanta has some negative tones to it too. Some people say it's the black gay capital and stuff like this. But I think that from Islamic point of view, our perception is to open up to the broader community and reach out. I'm also a member of an interfaith committee, and what we do, we try to have interfaith immersions with one another, come to know one another, and reach out. And that's had a big impact in terms of reaching out to the Christian community. At one time, the Christian community, especially this being the South, in the heart of the Bible Belt, a lot of people felt that, Muslims are, these people are extremists, these people are terrorists. But now, as we begin to break down these walls, as Muslims also come out of their shell and begin to reach out to the broader community, people will know us better, and we will know them better. And I think Atlanta is a good market for that to happen.
Okay, well, on that note, Brother Jamal, thank you so much. We're honored to sit down and talk to you, inshallah. We hope there can be a follow-up conversation, but this was a very good discussion. Thank you
I hope
so much.
so. I hope I did okay.